Welcome to Dropdown Descramble Part 2, Building the Animation. In the previous video, we explored this awesome text effect on the Marvin Shwaibold portfolio site. We studied how each character is going to drop down in a staggered fashion, and then some of them are going to descramble vertically, okay? So definitely watch that video first so you know why we're doing what we're doing today. Before we get into the code, I just want to note how close the letter spacing here is between each of the characters, and also the parent element that has the overflow hidden. I want to show you how it's very tight on the top and there's only a little bit of space sort of below, okay? And there's also just this little bit of space between the scrambled characters vertically, all right? So the first thing we're going to do today is take a little bit of a look at the CSS and try to get this tight character spacing and the overflow crop to be as tight as possible. Let's get going. So in the starter file, you'll see I have the word creative inside this red border, okay? And what's going on is that we have a heading 1 tag with individual divs inside of it for each letter. And what we're eventually going to do is populate this data car attribute with the other letters that are going to scramble in as pseudo elements, okay? But we're not quite there yet. What I want to do is deal first with this spacing above the V and below it. And you'll also see that the letters left to right, the letter spacing isn't really all that tight, okay? We want to get those letters closer together. We'll take a quick little dive into our CSS, and I thought to get the bounding box of the heading 1, right now it has that 1 pixel red border on it, closer to the characters, that if I had the font size and line height set to the same value, that would do it for me. But I really couldn't get it any closer, and I messed with a bunch of different settings. I got all frustrated. So I headed over to Twitter, where I posted a little bit of a challenge and a video showing how I wanted to get rid of that spacing. And fortunately enough, some people came to my rescue, okay? Jay had jumped in and said, hey, you know what? Set the line height to something that's a unitless number. And he said, try around 0.7. So when I did that, it tightened things up a little bit, but it also cropped the bottom of the C that I noticed. And then my pal here, Necto Designer, had recommended setting a little bit of a bottom padding to take care of it, all right? And along the way, Matthew Lean jumped in with some other suggestions, which I'll show you later on. So thanks everybody on Twitter. It was a huge help. So the first thing I'm going to do is inside of this heading 1 here, for the line height, I'm going to show you that I'm going to use a 0.7 unitless amount. And then watch what happens when I do that. Ooh, you'll see things tighten up quite a bit, okay? That looks cool. But it's a little bit too tight. So let's go to 0.75. And he said it's going to vary based on font, all right? So the 0.75 number gets us much closer to what we want. But if I zoom in real close here, actually what I should show you is that I'm using viewport with units on the font, which is huge because it allows me to scale up. And if you were to zoom in super close here, you'll see that the bottom of the C where it's curved, it gets sort of cut off by that red box. And to show that to you, let me just uncomment the overflow hidden, and I'm going to comment the border. And what you'll see is that there actually is a sort of flattening that happens there on the bottom of the C. So that's what we want to get rid of. So let's go back into our CSS here. I do want to keep this border on for a little bit because it's going to help us. But on the heading 1, I am going to add a padding bottom of 0.5 viewport width. And now you'll see we have just a touch of space between the bottom of the C and the bounding box. Now, at the top here, I'm still not completely happy with this space, but I don't want to take forever trying to get rid of it right now. Let's get into actually building this effect. First, we'll talk about setting up the pseudo elements. So a big factor of how this effect was set up by Jesper Voss is that we're going to use pseudo elements that are going to be above these characters that are also going to come down to descramble the wrong characters that we're going to see at first, okay? So I already have this h1 div before pseudo selector set up, and we have position absolute, top 0, left 0. And I'm going to start by just putting a content property on here, and I'm just going to put the letter, let's say R, okay? And then watch what happens. You'll see that new elements are put into the DOM with the letter R, and they sit right on top of those existing characters, okay? Well, we don't want them to sit there. We want them to be raised up. So what I'm going to do in here is put a transform on, and I'm going to say, let's do a translate Y. I played with the values a little bit, and I found that negative 103% was going to give me something pretty cool, all right? Oh wait, everything went away. Well, you know what? That's because I still have overflow hidden on here, so let's get rid of that. And now you'll see, aha, or should I say R, that's where everything is, okay? So for every character that we have here, there's now a pseudo element that's populated with the letter R. Now, one thing you're going to see here that's quite odd is that these two characters are very close together, all right? One of the things we discussed about this effect is that it only works if the characters that scramble in are the same width as the ones we're seeing on screen. So something like an I, we would never want to replace with a wide letter R, okay? So we'll deal with that too as we go on, but right now I like this because the pseudo elements are all sitting right on top of the normal characters and just right above this bounding box here. So now that we have them positioned, what I want to do is specify something other than the character R that's going to go in here. So let's go into our HTML, and here we have the data character attribute that I created, all right? And so what we're going to do here is use the content of this attribute to populate these pseudo elements. So remember, when the text initially comes in, it's going to be in a scrambled state, and then the proper letters are going to come in to replace them. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take the R and I'm going to put it into the data attribute, and I'm going to do the same thing with the E, and then that's going to allow me to put the wrong characters here. So maybe I'll put an A here and in S, and then on down the line, maybe the T is going to be replaced with, we'll say, I don't know, maybe it's originally going to be an N, and then we're going to put the T into the pseudo element, and then for the V, maybe we'll move it over to here, and we'll have an R, all right? So we can mess with these characters a little bit. So now we see this word Casanire, okay? It's definitely not creative. So how do we get these letters into these pseudo elements? Well, that's going to be the little CSS trick, okay? Let's go down to where we have our pseudo element, and instead of hard coding the R value here, what I'm going to do is say ATTR, which stands for attribute, and I'm going to say data-car. And watch this. Haha! Isn't that cool? So now the R and the E are going to drop down, and the T and the V. Pretty cool. Now, another cool thing that happened was that Jesper used dot characters to represent the characters that aren't going to be animated. So let me just throw those in real quick. We'll go to the HTML. And so the C is going to be the final character that we see on screen. It's not going to animate. So I'm just going to put a dot in there, and I'm going to do the same thing here, here, and here. So now this is all set up, let's get into writing some animation code. Alright, so over my JavaScript panel, I just have a basic timeline. I have some code commented out for GS Dev Tools. But before I start animating things, I need to set things up so they're in their start positions. So all of these divs inside the heading 1 need to move up outside of the heading 1 container. So to do that, I'm going to do a quick GSAP.set on all the H1 divs, and we're going to set your Y% to -103. And when I do that, you'll see, boom, everything moves up, and you'll see it's really, really close to that red line. I'd initially done 100%, but it doesn't get the bottom of the C out of there. So as I've said before, we're going to be messing around with some of the numbers. It's all based on what font you're using and other settings. So for now, that 103 works just fine. So now that everything's out of the way, we're eventually going to have overflow hidden on this heading 1, but I want you to see exactly what's happening before we do that. So inside my timeline, it's time to get to animating. And we're going to do a little stagger that's going to take all these heading 1 divs and move them down. So we're going to do a little 2-tween on those same H1 divs. And now we're going to say, hey, you know what? Let's set a duration of 1, and we're going to reset your y% to its normal 0. And if I just stop typing, woo, there you go. You see it real quick. I prefer to have the run button on in CodePen so that I don't see things animate while I'm typing, but for now, let's just put up with it. The real trick here is that I'm going to need to have a stagger effect, and we'll just do a very simple 0.05. We're going to keep the timing really close together. And now you'll see, look at that, they come in all dreamy. And remember, in the first video, we talked about how they were using an expo in-out ease that has that really strong ease curve at the beginning and end. So we'll just do an ease of expo.in-out, and we should get something that looks really cool. So now that I have this part in, I think it's time that we're going to go to our settings. We're going to enable our run button, and I'm also going to turn on GSDevTool so that if we need to scrub and really inspect this stuff, we can play the animation over and over when we wish. So there we go. Let's watch it one more time. You can pay attention to that ease. You'll see that it starts off slow, then goes super fast, and then kind of puts the brakes on using that expo in-out. So everything's set up really nice now, and for the big trick, we need to now take only the pseudo elements that do not have a dot in them and animate them down as well. So let me give you a little bit of space here. So check this out. We're going to do a two-tween again on the H1 divs, but here we're going to use the not selector. And what we're going to do is basically say we want all of these that don't have something special in their attributes, okay? So I'm going to use this bracket syntax to say data character equal to, and we're going to need to do a single quote of dot. So that means, again, all the divs in the H1 that do not have a data character value of dot. Let's see how this is going to go, all right? We're going to take them, and again, we'll set the duration to 1. And now we're going to move the y% down even further to positive 103. We're going to do a little bit of a stagger. And here we'll start off with just a 0.1 on it. And we'll also do our ease of expo.in-out. So here's the big reveal. Let's see if we get this working, and then we'll just do some fine tuning. I'm so excited. There it is. All right, so let's go to the slow-mo replay. We're going to have all these things in the overflow hidden zone. And when the animation plays, we're going to get this stagger of this weird Castanire word come in that we have no idea what it is. But once all those characters get down there, we're then going to stagger in only the ones that don't have a dot in those pseudo elements. Oh, I could watch this all day. It is gorgeous. Now to clean some things up, let's go back into our CSS. And I want to make sure we turn on overflow hidden because we no longer want to see things when they're outside of that red box. All right, you get me? And then we also want to make sure that there's no more border red, so we'll comment that out. And one little thing I forgot to do was the spacing between the characters, okay? I can't get this perfect, but what I can do is in these divs here, I'm going to do letter spacing, and I'm just gonna do something like negative 0.3 viewport width units. And now the next time we run, we're not going to see any box. Oh, I love it. Oh, it's so dreamy. Let's watch that one more time, and you should see that the text is a little bit more tightened up, if you will. And let's go a little bit wider here, okay? And just to show you that all of this is fully responsive, we don't need media queries or anything like that. Just using those viewport width units works a dream here. Let's scrub back just a little bit, and we'll watch it in slow-mo. Everything staggers in. We have no idea what this word is, but before we know it, all this stuff just cycles down, all right? It is great. Now, the only thing that's bugging me is this space here between the T and the I. And if we scrub back to see what character comes in here, it's an N, all right? So what you may have to do sometimes is figure out the width of these different characters, and maybe some work better than others. I'm going to go into my HTML, and where we have the T replacing the N, I'm going to change that over to an S, okay? And now when I run, I want to see if we end up with some tighter spacing, okay? Ooh, aha. Notice that the T and the I are much closer together now, all right? So it takes a little bit of guesswork, I think, in order to really pull this off. If you don't like so many S's here, maybe this first S can be, I don't know, let's make it an F. Now when we run, we'll have Cafficire, and you probably saw that little bit of a flash there. And to make this even better, we want to get rid of that flash of unstyled content, all right? So what we can do is in our CSS, we can take that heading 1 and we can do something like visibility hidden. And then in our JavaScript, we'll just have to turn it on. So we can do GSAP.set, and we'll say that the H1 is going to have its auto alpha of 1. So now when we run, we shouldn't see any sort of a flash of unstyled content, and it's just beautiful. So before I go, I just want to go over some additional resources, and I'll provide some links. All right, right here, Matthew Lean had provided an example of my challenge with the bounding box super tight around the characters, and it looks beautiful. I wasn't able to use this solution because when I added some content to the before pseudo element, it sort of blew up. Michael Toronto provided me with a link to Capsize, flipping how we define typography in CSS. And so basically it's a whole different metric system for dealing with fonts, all right? So I wasn't able to dive too deep into it, but it definitely looks pretty cool and gives you the type of control that you may need someday. So definitely check that out. And lastly, Jesper Voss, who had come up with this animation, told me about font drop. And I didn't get too far into this, but apparently it allows you to measure exactly which characters in a font are exactly the same size and can make your life a lot easier. So you can click on each character and you can get all this different information about it, all right? It definitely seems like a very cool site, so I would suggest you check it out. So again, I'll have links to all these additional resources in the lesson. But for now, I'm going to let you play with this effect on your own. I hope you learned a lot, and I hope it inspires you to do something similar in your own projects. Maybe you can build on it or just tweak it a little bit and make it your own. I'd love to see what you come up with. Happy animating! Do you want to gain mastery of the GreenSock animation platform through more videos like this? I'll show you all the tips and tricks I've learned over a decade of using GSAP, working at GreenSock, and teaching it to thousands of developers like you. My training is guaranteed to save you hours of frustration as you learn to add ultra-slick animations to all your web projects. Visit creativecodingclub.com today to unlock the world's most comprehensive GreenSock training, and let me help you discover the joy of animating with code.